There's no secret that reading is one of the best investments that you can make in yourself, and a lot of very successful people also seem to attribute much of their success to their reading habits.
Just read and read and read. I probably read 5 to 6 hours a day. I don't read as fast now as when I was younger, but I read 5 daily newspapers. I read a fair number of magazines. I read 10Ks, I read annual reports, and I read a lot of other things too.
I read a lot. There were always contests at the library in the summer where, if you read 10 books, you got a little gold star. If you read 20, you got like 2. And there were like 5 or 6 girls and I that would always read like 35 books, and we'd see, who could do the most.
But there's also no denying that reading is a pretty substantial time investment, and even for the fastest readers amongst us, a book of typically 500 pages takes roughly 10 hours to get through. Hello friends, in this video I want to share with you a 4-step process that I call the 4S technique, and it's something that I use to commit to memory all of what I read when it comes to predominantly non-fiction content. It comes from refining and learning from the very best on how they learn new concepts and remember effectively, as well as having read almost a book a week for the past year or so. Since our time is the most valuable asset that we have, it really makes sense to make sure that we're reading very effectively, and any time that we spend reading is a productive use of time. The way I see it, I think we too often read books because someone has recommended it online, or we've seen that it's a very popular book trending on Amazon or in bookstores. So we think, oh, we have to read this book because everyone else is reading it. But what I think we rarely do is think with intent. Why am I reading this book? Is it going to be useful to me? What am I trying to gain from reading this book? For example, a friend might recommend to you read Atomic Habits because it's a book that they really enjoyed. So you go out, you buy a copy of Atomic Habits, you get to the end, and yes, you're really inspired by what you've read. So you, for a few weeks, deeply implement all of James Clear's advice on how to build healthy habits. But then what you notice over a few weeks or a few months is that all of these kind of slip by. You forget what you've learned, and I think this really comes from reading passively because you've been influenced by other people or other means rather than reading with intent. By the way, my name is Yath. I'm a final year medical student at UCL in London, and on this channel I make videos about self-improvement, productivity and life as a medical student. And now let's talk about my process, the 4S technique. The first and most important part about reading is to be very selfish and ask yourself 3 questions. What am I seeking to learn from this book? Is it in line with my current interests and growth needs? And finally, will I benefit from reading this book at a later point in time? I think it's okay to be open-minded sometimes because we might not always understand what we're looking for, what we're after, but it always really helps if we have the end goal in mind from the outset. This doesn't apply to short form content like a 3-minute blog or a 10-minute YouTube video, but when you consider a 400 or 500 page non-fiction book, that's a pretty big sunk cost in terms of your time. Therefore, it's pretty reasonable for you to be very selective of how you spend this time. In asking these 3 questions, we can pick books that are fit for purpose, will allow us to gain the most value out of reading, and are timed well. So rather than thinking just in case and reading books that may be relevant to us at some point in the future, read books that are very relevant to you right now in whatever you're doing. So if you're an entrepreneur building out a new startup, you might want to read entrepreneurial books like Crushing It or The E-Myth Revisited. When a book is fit for purpose, we're way more likely to engage with it and therefore naturally take away lessons or concepts from the book. Secondly, we need to store information. There is only so much that our brains can store, and I think our brains are much better utilized when synthesizing or understanding new concepts than it is used to store information. And so we need to highlight and annotate as we're reading, and we need to be able to do this very effectively. So one of the ways I like to do it is when I come across a interesting point or a sentence by an author, I make an active highlight of it on my Amazon Kindle so that I can refer back to it at a later point. But what I do do is when I later refer back to it, I ask myself, is it still relevant to me? And if not, I disregard highlights because I only want to store the most salient and most important points. But being equipped with an Amazon Kindle, it's very effortless and very easy to highlight. So you can go about highlighting every other sentence and then suddenly you'll have just highlighted the entire book. So it's really important to remain disciplined and only highlight the most salient and important point. Even better than my highlights and annotations being synced across all of my devices, they are also very easily synced across to my favorite space repetition tool, and that is Readwise. And this brings us on nicely to the third component of the 4S technique, and that's about space repetition. Now, I think when it comes to remembering information for a very long time or forever, I think this is one of the most important components. Simply put, our brain doesn't form strong enough neural connections if an event only takes place once. However, if an event was to be repeated over numerous spaced out intervals, then we are much more likely to remember what we've learned. So when you bring this back to books, if you repeat something again and again, then you're way more likely to remember and commit it to memory than if you were to only read something once. Now, rereading books would be a terrible idea because hopefully you've already made highlights and annotations, so there's no need to reinvest all of that time into rereading a book. For this reason, I use a fantastic app called Readwise to present me with about 10 or so quotes each morning containing information that I've stored from various books that I read over the years. This is a very effective way of learning because you don't have to put in too much energy to relearn or re-engage your mind. The app does everything for you. With Readwise, you also have total flexibility on deciding how many quotes you want to receive each morning, how often you want to receive them, and also at what time of the day you want to receive them. Personally, I like to read them when I'm commuting or with my morning coffee, but you can choose when you receive them. It's just that easy. I recommend that you check out Readwise because it's an excellent tool for space repetition. And finally, the fourth component of the 4S technique is sharing of information or knowledge. If you know anything about Richard Feynman, then you'll know exactly what I'm on about here. Richard Feynman was a famous American physicist, but he was also very famously known for the Feynman technique. And this is the idea that if we can choose a very complex concept and then teach it very effectively and simply to a toddler or someone significantly young who may find it difficult to understand complex topics or terminology, then we probably understand very well the concept ourselves. The idea is that when we teach complex concepts to other people, what we find is gaps in our own knowledge, and therefore we can revisit or re-engage with the original literature to fill in those gaps ourselves. There are many ways in which we can share information. Personally, I take to social media, my weekly newsletter, and now this YouTube channel as well. Some other very effective ways of sharing information might be writing book summaries or engaging in conversations with friends and families and sharing new concepts that you're learning. So there you have it. Those are the four components of the 4S technique. Read books or consume content selectively with the end goal in mind. Store information by highlighting or making annotations as you're reading. Find a system that works for you to enable space repetition, and for me, Readwise is the gold standard when it comes to this. And finally, share information in whatever medium you feel is appropriate to you. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to check out my weekly newsletter where I share a weekly email on much of the same topics. Don't forget to leave a like and a comment down below, and if you use any other techniques to remember books, also let me know. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.